Why can't science and religion be friends? Put aside old feuds and vow to make amends. Why can't science and religion agree to work hand in hand for all humanity?
I want to welcome everybody to one of my favorite conversations in the world. The subject is essentially Institute of Noetic Sciences. And it was founded by the astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And you're going to be hearing so much more about it from somebody who worked closely with him, who happened to be here. And a night I had a film artist. So we put the two together and they made these films. And I decided I wanted to share it with any of you who wanted to have some idea from inside what happens with ions. And I got to tell you that my brother died a couple of years ago, and he was a Presbyterian minister from Princeton. He was a political science professor from USC, and there were lots of churches he served in and lots of universities he professored in. And I got to tell you that not long before he died, we had this amazing gift of driving him from Sacramento, where he lived, to the IONS board meeting. And he was telling us that all his life as a missionary kid, growing up in China and a life filled with churches and the Bible, he just wanted one place where they loved one another. And he kept hoping and praying for a church or a university or a someplace that it wasn't gossip and it wasn't badgering each other for more of the other guy's budget, all the things that go on in normal jobs. And he said he never in his life found that. And he was, 86? He never found that until he came to IONS. And being on the board of directors of IONS and watching how the scientists work with each other with such joy and cooperation and complementary and excitement at what each other was doing as they focused on consciousness. He was so thrilled that that was one of the greatest gifts I ever got, just introducing my brother to IONS and how he responded to it and how he served them in every way he could, because he really believed in what they're doing. So I am giving today as a gift to my brother and to all of you to be part of what IONS means to all of us. You will be hearing a lot from Dr. Cassandra Vieten. You will be hearing especially from one of the darling friends that IONS has introduced me to. And essentially, IONS changed my life by just the people they put in my life, the scientists and the books I've read. And, I never heard of all that stuff. And I was raised in that same Christian church of what a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Well, that's very Christian. And then I read Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief. That's about what a man thinks in his heart and are creating that. It's been an amazing trip. For 35 years at least, I've been with IONS and I love them dearly. I love what they're doing. And I'm so excited to introduce them to you today through Dr. Cassandra Vieten and through Ruth Broyde Sharone, who is a journalist. She has lived around the world. She has written books and she's made lots of films, and she is just, whew, you'll meet her. She's amazing. And so, Ruth, take it away. Thank you for being here with us. And thank you for filming Cassie.
I'm so delighted to be with all of you today and to tell you how this came about. What Tahdi didn't mention is that I have been writing a musical for the last few years called Interfaith the Musical. And it was nighttime. I was walking in my neighborhood and I had another one of what I call cosmic downloads, which I think fits perfectly with the theme of today. And the words that came out were, why can't science and religion be friends? And I was looking at the vast and starry sky when that question came up for me. And I remembered a transformational book that I read when I was in my teens. It was called The Physicists, The Mystic, and the Poet. And there were 3 sections to the book. They each spoke about their interpretation, their understanding, their grasp of the world. And they didn't tell you till the end of the book which one was the poet, which one was the scientist, and which one was the mystic. And the truth is that you couldn't tell the difference. And so from an early age, from my teens, I always had in the back of my mind that there wasn't a way to apprehend the world for all of us, and that it didn't matter whether we were scientifically oriented, whether we were spiritually oriented, or whether we were just people oriented, humanity oriented. We could still find a common place. So I'd like to start out by sharing this song, Why Can't Science and Religion Be Friends, sung by Susie Miller.
When Einstein announced his famous equation, E equals mc squared, he woke up the establishment 'cause they were not prepared. He said that matter could not be created or destroyed, but energy would take its place and occupy the void. The same is true about the nature of our transient souls. As we go from life to life to meet our spiritual goals. And when we die, we do not die. Our spirits will roam free. We shuffle off our mortal coil and greet eternity. Why can't science and religion be friends? Put aside old feuds and vow to make amends. Why can't science and religion agree to work hand in hand for all humanity? The mystics and the physicists all bathe in the same stream. They ponder the great mystery and share a common dream. They gaze in awe and contemplate the vast and starry sky. They long to know the reasons of the how, the where, and why. The truth is that we're all entwined, one sparkling golden web that spins and weaves around the globe, a mighty flow and ebb. And even when we think we are all separate and apart, the world says no, we're really just one giant beating heart. Why can't science and religion be friends? Put aside old feuds and vow to make amends. Why can't science and religion agree to work hand in hand for all humanity? When religion and science can drop their defiance, agree to compliance and forge an alliance. When science and religion will give up derision and make a decision to launch a new vision, then science and religion can be friends.
Yes, my friend.
Boy.
Amazing.
Science and religion can absolutely be friends. And so it was with utter delight that I encountered the organization, Institute of Noetic Sciences, actually before I even knew Tahdi. When I discovered what the organization was about, I thought, oh my goodness, this is the bridge. This is the bridge we need. And the person who so, in my mind, so exemplifies that human bridge is Dr. Cassandra Vieten. And I'd like to share the first video, which is actually, how did it all happen? How did she choose this road? How did this road choose her?
I've spent a lot of my adult life now at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and I remember when one of the former presidents, James O.D., who came to us from Amnesty International, was president there, and I was working there as a scientist. And he asked us all to share one of our first transformative experiences. And the experience I shared was that when I was about 9 years old, my parents showed me the miniseries Roots, or it was on PBS. And at that point, it was all the progressive parents were saying, we've got to show our kids this film so that they know what happened. And I thought, well, great, I get to stay up late and watch TV. This never happens. And so the first night I watched it and I was appalled. And the second night I watched it and I finally said, why are you showing me this awful movie? Like, why would you want me to see such a disgusting film? And they were like, it's not a movie, it's not a film, it's a real thing that happened, and we really want you to know that this happened. It's important that you know. And it was so devastating to me at the time that I didn't even feel like I could go to school the next day. You know, they said, okay, time to go to bed and get ready for bed. And I thought, I can't wear my pajamas and go to bed and go to school. And I think at some level inside of me, the only way I could reconcile that knowledge that had happened in the world was to say to myself in some 9-year-old language, the only thing I can do is to try to make my life about making sure something like this can never happen again. And even at that age, I knew it was like, there's got to be a way that we can get people to see the world so that that's not possible for them to do. And so if you fast forward all the way to working at IONS, that's really what the whole organization is about, is how do we view the world, how do we view our place in the world and our relationship to other people, and how does that influence everything we think, everything we believe, and all the ways that we behave toward ourselves, toward one another, and the planet. And so when Edgar Mitchell was on his way back to Earth from his moonwalk, after having been the 6th person to walk on the moon on Apollo 14, he saw the Earth from space, and he was overcome by a completely different, but in a way similar, epiphany, where he thought, number one, he felt himself one with everything he saw, the Earth and the stars and the sun and the moon and the space capsule. He knew for sure at a very deep and certain level that the molecules of my body are the exact same molecules that make up the space capsule and the Earth and the sun and the stars. And we're not different. It's a non-dual experience. There's really no duality. There's no two. There's only one. But we're all playing out our particular roles in the one. And that was accompanied by this tremendous sense of bliss and ecstasy and a sense of belonging. And not only that, but an intelligence or a light shining through everything, like an order in the universe. And he could feel it. But then when he looked at our planet from space, he could see that because of our own limitations in the way we see the world as humans, we're engaging in all of these activities that are really insane when you stop to think about it. But when you see it from that perspective, it's particularly insane because it's such a small planet. So the idea that we can harm other people while benefiting ourselves, or degrade the environment, or war, and unequal resources, that all comes out of this. It's not a limitation of the resources on the Earth. It's a limitation in the way we see the Earth and our relationship to it and each other. And so he had these two experiences in combination, And so if you really recognize your interconnectedness with everybody else on the planet and with the planet itself, with all beings, then it becomes very difficult to engage in behaviors that benefit yourself and harm others or harm the planet. So that's what drew me to IONS, was how can we foster shifts in worldview that make it impossible for people to harm each other intentionally or harm the planet or ignore the plight of other people. The second major experience was that I read the book that your older audience will know is Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein when I was about 15 years old. And at the time I was living in Southern California in sort of a soccer, malls, high school, tract home sort of environment, you know? Although I will say my mom's interest in Jungian-oriented psychotherapy and my dad's interest in science and astronomy and adventure and art and literature, these were great, great things. But there was kind of a vacuum of consciousness in the area that I lived. Not a lot of people talking about it. And so when I read the book, which if you don't know about it, is about a human who's raised on Mars, science fiction, and he comes to Earth, and because he's learned the Martian language, he has the ability to use his mind to think his body in certain ways, to move things, teleportation, telekinesis, and telepathy, and all these different things. And so it's not really that he has special powers, like that he's not human, because he is. He just learned a language and a way of viewing the world that unlocked these capabilities. And so on Earth, he teaches all these people the language, and as soon as they start thinking in the language, they have the capacities too. So this just captivated me. And not only that, it opened the door to a completely natural love of everyone and really shedding a lot of the boundaries and social conventions. And so that just captivated me at 15. And I literally was like, that is what I want to find out about forever.
We are now developing more paranormal abilities, more synchronicities are happening, more telepathy amongst us, and very soon we may reach that place where, like the Martian who came to Earth but was human, we will have the ability to feel each other so deeply when we meet that, as Cassie said, we will not be able to do anything to harm one another. Mm-hmm. But what we need for that to happen is we need people who can be the bridges. And so the second video I'd like to introduce now is called A Beautiful Bridge. And that is what Dr. Cassandra Vieten is, and which many of you are already doing in your lives as well. And we need to spread the gospel even farther.
I absolutely think that science on the one hand and spiritual wisdom traditions, including the religions, but also non-traditional forms of spirituality, are not contradictory necessarily, but they're complementary ways of knowing. And I heard someone describe it once, sort of like neighbors, and they'd go out in their backyard and they'd look over the fence and they'd talk to each other while they were watering the plants. So they were saying they don't think that the fence should necessarily come down, but they do think that science and religion should start to talk over the fence to each other and learn from their perspective what are they learning about reality. And so I think the Institute of Noetic Sciences offers people who are into science but they don't want to lose their souls or their hearts or their faith to be able to have a science that doesn't degrade their interiority, their subjective experience, but also for people who are religious to not have to completely abandon science or to have science risk their religious belief. So yeah, I do think it's a beautiful bridge between science and spirituality, and it hopefully will continue to spread. I was invited to an interfaith dialogue hosted by Father Thomas Keating at Snowmass, and he's been meeting with the same group of people for about 20 years. And they invited me maybe 10 years ago because they wanted two things. One was to start to bring in young people because their average age was somewhere between 70 and 85. And then they also wanted me to come and represent the faith tradition of science, which I thought was a really great thing, because they were basically like, you have faith in experiments, in observing, in hypothesis testing, in replication, in attempting to get rid of noise. That's the faith that we want you to talk about. Now, most scientists would just shudder at the idea of calling science a faith, but they really had a point that that was just yet another way of viewing reality. And so I was really honored to be there.
Have you ever met anybody that you couldn't talk to because of the schism between faith and
No,
science?
because I was raised in a family where my father is atheist, and I guess he would be, I would say agnostic, but he's somewhere between agnostic and atheist, but he certainly doesn't believe in things like life after death or God, and in fact would say that religions have harmed more people than they've helped. And so I was raised in that environment. Now my mom was a Jungian-oriented psychotherapist who was very interested in dreams and symbolism and mythology and goddesses, and so yeah, so not surprisingly, they divorced and found people that were closer to their way of looking at the world. But those live inside of me. So I love scientists, and I really I respect and understand and have compassion for the perspective that says that we cannot fall prey to superstition, because the same way that an over-reliance on science and technology as the sole ways of knowing the world has taken us to the brink of nuclear war, and science without accompanying ethics is a big problem. But if it's not that long ago that religion took us to the same kind of dark place where there was the Inquisition and mass murder of genocides based on religion. And so both of them have shadows, both of them have positive sides, and I understand that people who are scientists and atheists and even passionate atheists are actually trying to protect us from going into another dark ages. So I really have fun with people. I find that if you bring joy to the conversation and you really want to know how they see the world and what they think, and then you can go back and forth with them, it's pretty enjoyable.
The operative words are, for me, bringing joy to the conversation. And I'm hoping that Tahdi will say something to that, because that is one of her mottos that she reminds me every time we talk. Can you share with us, Tahdi?
Yes, absolutely. Because I love Jesus. He said, I came that your joy might be full. Oh, he said, I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. He did not come and say, you're a bad girl, go to the principal's office, you can't come back to school next semester, or. Those things came from religion. So here I am, an ordained minister from Matthew Fox, who saved my life, that doesn't really care for religion as such. We are right now, with Ruth's help, a bunch of us are building a seminary that's interfaith, where Muslims and Buddhists and Catholics and Christians and Mormons can all be learning from each other and helping each other expand and include, be inclusive, be cooperating, where we can learn to love one another. We are all originals. We are not duplicates, whether God or the source or the universe, whatever you want to call him. The creator made us all originals, and we're supposed to be different. I'm not supposed to be like somebody else, and neither are you. So it's that kind of thing I see us able to help each other. I mean, we can say, here's what would make it more acceptable, or there's so many ways that we can hold hands and be of encouragement and patting on the head. And I love IONS for teaching me that. Back to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Tahdi. I know that from my experience, Tahdi brings joy to every conversation. And I think that if we could approach one another when we have vast differences, whether it's political, spiritual, economic, whatever differences we have, if we could approach each other with a feeling of joy that we are able to communicate, that we have words, that we have methods, we have modalities of being able to reflect back and forth about what it is we think, but to do it with joy, wouldn't that make a difference in all of our communication? I'm going to share the next video now with you, and I want to say something about it. It's called Infinite Potentiality. And you know, the quantum theory in science changed science forever, because I'm going to simplify it enormously. I'm not a scientist, but my understanding of it, which helps me understand my own life as well, is that when scientists would measure light in a certain way, it would appear to be made up of infinite particles. But if they would measure the same light, the same quantity of light in a different way, it would appear to be waves. And then the question was, how is it possible? Is it wave or is it particle? Which one is it? And as Cassie said in one of the earlier videos, it's not duality, it's one. It's both. It's both particle and wave, as we are.
I was talking to this quantum physicist who's at the University of Arkansas. His name is Lothar Schaefer, and we were teaching together. And he has created in his laboratory an environment that allows him to witness the transition of energy from wave to particle, or from photons, basically, from wave to particle. And so he was explaining to me how when it starts, it's a very, very freezing cold environment. There's ultimate potentiality. In other words, the energy is equally likely to be in any position. So when people who maybe could be accused of being new age say there's infinite potential, there actually is, in a way, infinite potential. And there comes a set of circumstances where the energy collapses into a particle and something happens in the material world. And so that's just one we're just barely starting to get at. When is it that something moves from being invisible to visible, or moves from being possible to being real, or to being manifest? And the whole theory, from our perspective, is, does awareness or intention or attention have anything to do with that? And we think it might. We hypothesize that it might. So that's one very important line of research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, is how does belief or intention or thought change our own bodies, and how does it interact with other people's awareness, and then how does it interact with the physical world?
I asked Cassie, I said, well, how do you speak about these esoteric topics with lay people to make them understandable and not to separate yourself from people who may not be scientists and may not even know the terms that you would probably be most likely to use? Because there again, in this communication between people on opposite sides of thought, there needs to be a bridge that can make that language that passes between two people, two ideas, understandable, graspable. So this is Cassie's answer to that, how to make esoteric knowledge available and comfortable for lay people.
One of the things we do through a program called Living Deeply, which is also a book that we wrote about the research we've done on transformations in consciousness, is work with people around creating the conditions in their lives or in their environments that would make it most likely that a potentially traumatic experience could be shifted to a transformative experience. So we know what some of those conditions are. Having a supportive community, having a daily mind-body practice, having symbols and stories and cosmologies that you access that can help you not just explain your subjective experience, but expand it, and many, many other aspects that you can put in place in your life, either after something like that happens, or in general, make sure they're maintained in your life so that when something like that happens, it's more likely that you're going to learn from it than be demolished by it or closed down or crunched into fear around it, at least on a long-term basis. So I just want to say about that I think this is true in society as well. If this is a political crisis that is calling for transformation and growth, it's not just going to happen on its own. We all, as a conscious community, have to put the factors into place, or the conditions into place, that make it more likely that we're going to be able to transform through this crisis. Because I do think there's a real danger of going into another 100, 200, 400-year dark ages if those of us who are awake don't put those conditions in place. And that's our responsibility. So having people who are awake and conscious sit around and shrug their shoulders and shake their heads and talk about how awful and disgusting and terrible it all is and how those people are bad, that's actually not the conditions for post-traumatic growth. We have to harness what we know about how people change and what conditions support positive changes. And it's kind of like right now, everybody needs to be on the field. Nobody can be in the armchair, no one can be on the bench, no one can be in the bleachers. Everybody who's awake needs to be on the field and doing whatever their particular set of talents and resources and knowledge is telling them to do about this situation. So that's how we convert it. But no, I don't think that in one person's life or in society, we can all just sort of hope it's going to be transformative.
So she says everybody has to be on the field. No one gets to do Monday morning quarterbacking anymore. We don't have enough, how should I say, time or bandwidth to just sit back and watch what's happening and not take part in some form, whether it be in our daily practice or in launching your own organization or in volunteering or in whatever way. I think that that's really the message, especially after 2 years of being mostly in lockdown, is that now, as we are coming out again, going back to work, meeting with people, that we need to assess what it is, what did we learn during these last 2 years that can contribute to the growth and benefit of the world. And it means most particularly, what are we, what are you, what am I going to do that's different? The next topic I'm going to approach with you through the interviews with Dr. Cassandra Vieten is leadership, women's leadership. And one of the remarkable things that I learned talking to her at Tahdi's home was that the leadership has significantly changed. That used to be primarily a male-led and male-dominated organization. And today, mostly women are at the helm. And I asked her about that and what also that portends for what's happening, not just in IONS, but in other important organizations around the world.
But now we have a female CEO, a female president, and a female board chair. And I really think that triumvirate of women leading IONS, when it used to be Edgar Mitchell, Willis Harman, Wink Franklin, all of whom I admire so much and would aspire to be like someday. I'm not comparing myself to them necessarily, but there's something that women do around leadership and around this question of consciousness that is different. And one is that it's extremely collaborative, so we tend to always lean toward working with other people, other organizations, cross-platform teams, and that's just a thing I think that women feel comfortable doing, sometimes more than men, not all men. And the other thing that I think is maybe even more important is that women experience consciousness as embodied. And there has been a tradition at IONS over time of being this sort of gentlemanly, scholarly consciousness club, and sometimes I call it the beard stroking. Consciousness is a very important topic that we all must take very seriously. It's just kind of this heavy, whereas I think the feminine coming into IONS for this second 50 years, because we're at year 45, we're going to be at 50 years, 5 years from now. So as we move into the second 50 years of IONS, women in general are not able to keep consciousness up here because we, menstruate, we have babies, we give birth, we nurse, all of those things make it so that we are talking about the heart, we're talking about the gut, we're talking about where are your feet standing right now, what are you doing with your hands. It's not just about what you're thinking, and it's not just about like lifting yourself, transcending this mundane world into the perfect, pristine world where all thoughts are ideals. That's a thing, that's okay. But what we really want to do is bring consciousness into our bodies, to heal our bodies, to heal one another, to heal the planet, to be in touch with nature, and not to get out of where we are now, but to get more in to where we are now, more authentic, more real, more vulnerable, more loving, more connected. And that's what I think the feminine perspective will not get rid of the masculine, but balance it out.
Tahdi, I would love you to participate at this moment in talking about women leadership and what you've noticed over the more than 35 years that you have been inviting speakers to come to the LA community group.
Jane Goodall wrote a book that my nephew is the head of the IONS group in Idaho. And he was telling me about her book in a way that made me want to read it. I've got 1,000 books here that I haven't read that I desperately want to read. And I ordered it. I read it in one day. And let me tell you her last line. It says, "Together we can make the world a better place for all living things." And I don't know why that makes me cry, because together is the point of it all. And that's what Cassie's talking about. Women are more at ease. It was the chairman of the board of IONS that introduced me to heart math. I'd never heard of heart math. I didn't know what that was about. And now it's one of my favorite organizations in the world. And because of IONS, it's putting my fingers and toes in lots of people's water that I'm so excited about. And maybe that is the direction of the feminine, but we all were based on a man. And she's absolutely right. We have babies and all those kinds of things, but it starts with a man. And so it's somehow working together that we have to learn. But that what the men and the women are bringing is so powerful that I can't believe they're getting along so well together. Like my brother said, for them to be the first place to actually learn how to love one another and treat each other is just incredible. And I remember, so when we first started this, it was that, amazing Willis Harmon who wrote The Global Mind Change. And definitely we should all read that book. We should read Jane Goodall's book. There's so many books that we need to be reading that are covering both sides now. But he used to come down like every 3 months, and he would spend a whole day with us. And in those days, we were at a different church on Wilshire Boulevard. And we would start at 9 in the morning with coffee, and then he would start at 10 and we'd go to 5. And it was hard to throw people out. It was so exciting, the discussions we could get into that covered all different bases. So yeah, I just, whew.
Thank you, Tahdi. Tahdi, I want to go back to one of the things that Cassie said in her last video, that I think touches me, and I think is kind of a prescriptive. It's a great prescription for what's coming now and how we need to be if we want to work on ourselves. She says how to get more authentic, more real, more loving, more connected. Now, those are not specifically female qualities.
Yeah.
And I think what she was very careful at the end, if you recall what she said, she was not putting men down at all. And I think that is one of the mistakes that happened with the feminist movement when the pendulum began to swing to the other side and got very extreme in its condemnation of men. And I think that what we're aiming for, all of us, is for balance, is to be partners, not to have one on top of or behind, but to be side by side in this grand adventure together. And I think that's what IONS is doing also with religion and science, of not putting spirit down to say that science is king and science is the only thing that matters. Or on the other hand, not looking askance at science and saying the only thing that matters in the world is spirit. We're both body and mind and energy and matter. And if we don't find the way to balance all those things in our society and respect them, we will continue, as we have until now, to be engulfed in war and destruction. And for example, if you take the environment, a perfect example of not caring, not being custodians, not being connected, not being loving. So these issues are not singular to the dialogue between religion and science. They are core to every conversation that we're having now. And I think that's what the pandemic made clear to us about where we need to focus our attention on the conversations that are most urgent for us in developing and expanding to the place where we all can appreciate the life force that we received. We're going to go directly to the last two videos of our program today. And the first one is called Frontiers of Consciousness. And the second one is what astronaut Edgar Mitchell said after he came back from his space trip and what he came to understand in a new way.
There are only about 550 people who have been into space in the history of humanity that we know of. And so that is a very unique perspective when you look at the millions and millions of people who have lived. Not many people get that perspective, and it's different than seeing it on film or seeing it in animation or something, to be there. And, I think Edgar saw clearly something that other astronauts have seen, and the big difference with Ed was, number one, that he was a scientist, because especially at the time of Apollo, there were not that many scientists going into space. They were all like Navy pilots and military people. And so when I've talked to other Apollo astronauts, they've said Ed was the smart one, So he took up a certain way of looking at the world scientifically, but he also took up a lot of open-mindedness and fascination with extended human capacities and various ways of seeing the world. He actually took a psychic experiment with him to the moon, into the space capsule, and he wanted to see, when they were on the dark side of the moon, could he send symbols back to the Earth? And he had many people who were claimed to be, or purported to be, very accurate psychics who were waiting to have these signals sent to them at certain times. And so they would write down what they thought they were going to get. And so he was really open-minded in that domain too. So I think all of that was the perfect storm for him to have an insight that could shift the course of humanity. There was one day I was talking to Ed, and I said, he was really happy with the way the Institute of Noetic Sciences was unfolding after many, many years. And he had always wanted IONS to be very much about science and to really try to crack the code of the interaction between consciousness and the material world and the perhaps illusory nature of time and, really the very fabric and nature of reality. He was very interested in it. And so he was happy that when I was CEO and president there, we had really refocused a lot of the energy of IONS toward the scientific endeavor, the frontiers of consciousness. And so I said, well, Ed, what's exciting you now? Like, what's up in your life? And he said, well, we've been taught that the universe is made of matter and energy, and I think it's made of matter, energy, and consciousness. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life investigating that and promoting that idea in the world. And I thought, out of all the years I've been here at IONS trying to explain what it is we're up to, that's probably the most succinct explanation. And now I use it with people and it makes sense to people. There's matter and energy, we know that from physics. But what if there's also a third leg to the stool, matter, energy, and consciousness? And some people would even say that the matter and energy is arising from consciousness. Other people would say that consciousness arises from matter and energy, like our brains produce consciousness. And I think I tend to take both approaches, that we have sort of a handshake between matter, the material world, and then the immaterial world or the interior world, which turns out to be much more causal than we ever thought it was. One of my last conversations with Edgar, and it was working at IONS, and it's very difficult to find a word that says the word consciousness without saying the word consciousness, which is just so long and not very penetrable, So we're always thinking about what can we call it. So I sat down with him at dinner up at the campus and said, all right, Edgar, if you couldn't call it consciousness, and we couldn't use the words quantum or holographic or all of our jargon, what would you say we should call it? And he just looked at me and said, well, if I had to call it one thing, I'd call it love. So I think in the end, that is where we all land, is, am I loving? Am I leading with love? Am I parenting with love? Am I teaching with love? Am I doing science with love? And, and it even fits in the scientific world. This came from Rick Tarnas, and he was talking about science, and he said, science, as it has been for the most part, has been trying to torture nature out of her secrets, and it will never succeed doing that. It must be like a lover and seduce or entice or, romance nature out of her secrets. And so even as a scientist, you can approach what can be a very cut and dried protocol with love, with a love of respectfully and with humility asking nature to reveal something for the well-being of all. And so it'll be really interesting to see if we approach science in that way, will we learn more.
We're just a few days away from Valentine's Day, and how fitting to think about approaching everything in the world with love. This was, I think, Edgar Mitchell's Valentine to the world. This Valentine to humanity from Edgar Mitchell, from Dr. Cassandra Vieten, from our hostess, Tahdi Blackstone, who has so eminently symbolized doing everything with love and with joy and with passion, is a way for us to consider how we want to go forward ourselves.
I love that so much. Edgar Mitchell saying all the same things that the church says, and that's what it's about. And there's Jesus again, and Thich Nhat Hanh and Dalai Lama, and oh my God, I mean, they're all on this same wavelength, and still we have wars and racism, and oh God, I just think if only we can get the word out there, and it's that together word that excites me, that there's nobody we can't hold hands with, we can't talk to, we can't open our hearts to, we can't listen and share.
I wanted to add one thing to the together that you just mentioned, because some of us feel we get up in the morning and there is so much work to be done, and we say, I'm only one person. How can I do anything significant that will change the world? There is a beautiful quote in Hebrew that says, I'll translate it, Lo alecha ligmor avodah. It's not upon you to finish the work of a lo lihimana mimenu, but neither can you desist from it. So it's not about maybe in your lifetime, it's like planting a tree that your children will enjoy the fruits and the shades from that tree, but you still do the work now. You can't not do it. You have a responsibility to continue it. Doesn't mean you have to finish it, but certainly to begin it or to join it together.
The mystics and the physicists all bathe in the same stream. They ponder the great mystery and share a common dream. They gaze in awe and contemplate the vast and starry sky. They long to know the reasons of the how, the where, and why. The truth is that we're all entwined, one sparkling golden web that spins and weaves around the globe, a mighty flow and ebb. And even when we think we are all separate and apart, the world says no, we're really just one giant beating heart. Why can't science and religion be friends? Put aside old feuds and vow to make amends. Why can't science and religion agree to work hand in hand for all humanity? When religion and science can drop their defiance, agree to compliance, and forge an alliance. When science and religion will give up derision and make a decision to launch a new vision, then science